Alright everyone, welcome to this webinar sponsored by Intel, which we're super grateful on. We're here to discuss the 5G future and accelerating Telco Cloud deployments. My name is Jeremy Foster and I'll be playing the moderator role in this discussion. Joining me, we have three captains of industry. Starting off from Intel, we have Thomas Sennhauser, CTN Business Lead for APJ from Intel. Welcome, Thomas. Great to see you. We also have from Tech Mahindra, Manish Mangal, Global Head of Network Services. Welcome, Manish, to the call. And also from Spark New Zealand, we have Nilay Rathod, Domain Chapter Lead for Orchestration and Automation for Telco Cloud. Welcome, Nilay. Great to have you guys on the call.
Thank you.
So what I thought we'd do is just invite each of you to offer some kind of opening comments just to get us thinking about Telco Cloud, 5G, and some of the challenges and opportunities that we as an industry will face. And as our industry has multiple layers, I thought that Thomas, working for Intel, you bring this really 60,000 foot perspective on what we need to do. So would you mind just opening up with, what's topical for you at Intel as you start to, think about those building blocks and some of the ways that we might think about cloud and the way that will evolve, please.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. And let's start a little bit, from a higher level. I think, again, with 5G and cloudification, what we see is really a trend in the industry which allows us, to drive things different than we did maybe in the previous years with 4G. And what we see is really the adoption of separation hardware and software, which started with the NFV, NFVI, where we brought up, VNFs, which is now moving to cloud services, microservices. We see also a big trend, with the ORAN. So the same stuff which has happened on the core side is moving now on the RAN side, which again open up a new ecosystem. And I think from an Intel point of view, what we want to do is really open up the network, enable a broader ecosystem which allows the industry to drive innovation faster and more open, so that you're not having black boxes and it's hard to access that. And again, the other part what we see is the open source part which we want to drive, so that innovation comes from that. And again, getting a broader ecosystem, I think is critical. And then working, of course, with all the partners together, who drive that. And then in the 5G cloud space, the other part what we also see is, of course, who is using that. And we talk a lot about consumer, but we see, of course, the enterprise customer, the industry, which is driving that and giving access, for everybody in the world really to drive that. So that's a little bit, where we see the things on a super high level point of view. Fantastic.
Manish, Thomas mentioned the word ecosystem a couple of times, and I think that's a really nice segue as we then get a little bit closer to, how that ecosystem needs to fit together and some of the things that you see in your role as a continuous integrator across the tech world. What are some of the opening, perspectives that you bring into this as we look at challenges and opportunities, please?
Absolutely, Jeremy. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this forum. And I think you used a very important word there, which is continuous integrator, and that's how we kind of saw ourselves. A year ago, we kind of looked at what does the role of a system integrator looks like it, and we basically said the very first statement is that the way the system integration as an industry used to exist doesn't exist anymore. It's not the right way to look at how do we address the problem statement for the industry, which is really all about open ecosystem, building the disruptive supply chain into the technology players and allow a innovation to flow through at a much faster pace. So we kind of came up with two terminologies. One is what does it take for a technology from a incubation to consumption? In our industry, we have typically been used to a 3 to 5 year life cycle. By the time a technology gets incubated in some R&D lab and it goes through the standardization process, and by the time it gets products get developed and it gets deployed, it's a 3 to 5 year minimum cycle. In today's day and age, that's eternity. I mean, the entire technology comes and goes by during that time. So the first thing that we focused on what does it take for that incubation to consumption, where basically the customers are actually using in their hands. That cycle gets reduced to the IT industry levels, where somebody who can actually come up with an idea, get it developed, get it out there in the customer's hands, and within 3 to 6 months, actually you can be using it. So how do we bring that in a very closer fashion? And to achieve that with an open ecosystem, which is the only way it can happen, integration of all the different open ecosystems have to be done much faster. So that's why we reinvented ourselves, that we need platforms, we need skills, we need capabilities that allows the new technologies to be integrated into the existing environments and the new environments that we are continuously deploying, like 5G, to be done at a much faster pace and done in an automation such that it just continuously getting integrated, getting in the hands of the customer. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you discard it and move on. So that model is where we came from. And there is a whole lot of things that we'll discuss today, and the industry is discussing about why the cloud and the what we termed as a telco cloud as an industry is so important in making that happen, because the longest pole in the tent, one of the longest pole in the tent had been about the infrastructure itself, which takes a larger lead cycle to make any changes inside it. So if we make that as a cloud native based on the cloud principles and have hyper automation as a way to operate and manage it, then we would have achieved or given ourselves a chance to achieve that, the shortest path of incubation to consumption. So that's what we are about, and love to discuss that more as we go through this session.
Fantastic. Incubation to consumption, and Manish just mentioned 3 to 5 years is an eternity. And of course, you're faced with an even, shorter time cycle, Nilay, as you look at delivering to your customers and the way that you look inside your business. What are some of the advice, if you like, that you might give to any operator that is facing this, and the way that you start to look at what are the challenges and opportunities from your perspective, please?
Thank you. I think Thomas and Manish rightly mentioned that the network in telco is evolving, and it's evolving very fast. We're coming from an era where there used to be an network function sitting inside physical appliances. You buy appliances and you install and you get to go. And then we moved on to virtualization, right? And while operators were trying to establish automation and virtualization landscape, now we've got 5G, which is built on cloud native architecture, right? So there's, I think it's very fast paced for operators. So what we are doing from Spark perspective is, or what we have been doing from Spark perspective in last 1 year is building foundation for this type of technologies. So in last 1 year, we focused on trialing own app for our core network automation. We looked at use of open source framework and standards for automating our access network. And we've also been modernizing our provisioning stack with a new and modern architecture, And there's been some huge learning there, right? These things are new, and it's really difficult when you operate in a disaggregated network, But we've got some good stories to share that I'm gonna take a chance to share in this session, What we're gonna focus on in the next couple of years is accelerating more and more use case that brings value for operator. We're also gonna focus on getting our automation stack ready for 5G and MEC use cases, which is things like 5G cell site rollout and network slicing for future, right? And last but not least is using those automation foundation that we built and data that is out there to build smart network, right? But this is where things like zero touch provisioning or zero touch automation comes into picture.
Fantastic. It's really interesting listening to some of those I picked up, some of the new use cases. One of the things that has been, I've been thinking about a little bit is risk. What are some of the risks that you, Nilay, as an operator, when you look into, zero-touch automation and all the complexity, what are some of the risks that you think, we as an industry need to orientate ourselves as we look to help you navigate those? What are the kind of things that float up for you?
I think ambition, I think there is no best of breed. You can't implement a vertical stack because you will be in risk with vendor locking and other the technology risk. While you try and adopt this segregated network with best of each component, integration is very difficult. While we speak about open standard, when you try and implement these dependencies, integrating these components together, so that's one thing that we've seen in our past years' experience. Things like certification as well. So when we tried and implemented OpenStack, one of the OpenStack, try and align other vendors to the OpenStack that you choose, in virtualization landscape, it's very difficult, because typically network vendors certify their network function onto a set of hardware and platforms, right? So now, essentially, when you're moving to that zone, you're inviting that challenge to yourself as an operator, and you have to automate. That's the only way out of that, right? So those are some of the challenges that I've seen, Jeremy.
Thomas, Nilay mentioned certification, and it's and in the opening part of his comments, he talked about physical monoliths, that the software and the hardware's fine, it's good, everything's fine. And in your opening comments, you talked about the ecosystem and making sure the ecosystem was healthy. How do you see this vibrant ecosystem that we start to see, really expanding around 5G and cloud? And how do you see us working together to help contain those risk items that operators will face as they want to make different choices towards, what compute they might use or what applications or partners they might have? From an industry perspective, what are some of the, shall we say, strategic moves that the ecosystem might take in order to provide that kind of risk containment?
Yeah, I think one thing what we're doing is, again, we have open labs. We pushing that on certification. We work with partner together, to do a certification process, but also, getting that to a certain level of automation. As said, I think the things is really that it's getting faster done, that the effort can be held back, and that we can, kind of a sausage factory, you can certify application in a faster tray, and again open up that labs to the industry, so that people can leverage that investment, and not everybody has to build their own kind of lab, and then it's used maybe Monday to Tuesday, but the rest of the week it's just eating a lot of energy and cooling. So I think that's something I see, and then the other part I think is really the standard is critical. Because with this opening up, and you can, match what you want to do with different components, very, very open. There is a lot of integration work, and I think that needs to get better. That the standard is hard to follow, and again that we have more of these hackathons and integration labs where we can certify and drive that, so that when it goes, to the operator, that they have to do, of course, their integration and their work, but that's easier, easier to consume, easier to do that. And, we do a lot with that, with blueprints, with, bringing pre-integrated solutions together. We're working with the standard groups on that side. I think that's definitely something where we can get better as an industry, I think, and where we need to go. The other part, I think, is the risk is also, I think, a lot of the things is on the technology side, but to be frank, I see the broader risk is on the resources. Everybody is fighting for the same type of industry knowledge people. So I think one of the risks we have in the industry in general is how do we attract the right people, compare them, that everybody goes to the big software, to the cloud provider. How do we make sure we have these resources? We can, maintain the best capacity in the industry. I think that's also something we need to look into. It's not only about integration and technology. It has also to do a little bit with the people and how do we get that on board.
So yeah, absolutely. And Manish, you're very much in a people business, and the skills and those their ambitions and where they've come from and the kind of challenges that they face. What are your reflections on what a company like TechM and the broader industry needs to invest in order to lean into these future needs that our industry faces?
Yeah, Jeremy, I would just say that we are all in the people business, and that Thomas said that at the end of the day, we are entering into an era that actually is supremely exciting, right? So if you are a young generation getting into the industry, I don't think that there was ever a time to be in the telecom industry and be this excited about it. And the reason I say that is because I don't think there is a shortage of skill set. I think there is new skill set that needs to be developed that were never required for our industry, right? And I'm kind of saying the same thing that Thomas is saying, but I'm saying it in just a different way, because what we realized was that we are getting in a place as an industry where the skill sets of the IT, where software development was very natural to them. They were very development-centric world there, where they actually didn't write white papers. They built codes and then tested it, and if it worked, then they wrote the white paper about how they did it. They never wrote the design first and then went out that direction, right? And telco industry was really about the domain knowledge. We really need to have the RF engineer, because your developer just can't do an RF engineering work. But if you want to bring in automation into how do you build the RF engineering, how do you deploy sites faster, you require both knowledge. And I think that's where we are seeing that huge amount of opportunities where to bring in the talent pool of domain knowledge and the development together that creates that combination. And hence, this new set of skill sets are not something that's readily available. I mean, so often that we create the job descriptions when we start writing it down and we say we want code development experience, we need Java, we need Python, we need we need all sorts of development skill sets. And by the way, they need to know networking. They also need to be an IP design guy. They need to be able to do IP address management. They, by the way, also need to be able to integrate for a radio SIPRI interfaces. They need to know, the list goes on, right? And the requirement list goes on, the candidate list becomes shorter and shorter just because that's not possible. So what we ended up doing is two fundamental things to address that. One is to Thomas's earlier point that we need a pre-integration so that when it actually goes out into the production environment with Nilay trying to deploy it, you don't need that much of an advanced skill set at that time. You need to be able to pre-stack it so that it becomes easier with zero-touch operations to be able to go provision and operate it. For that, we created something called a VNF Exchange Lab around 3 years, where we tested more than 75 different partners and variety of different combinations to test and what happens. But we also realized that that's not a one-time activity, because the technologies are changing, the product roadmaps are changing, and hence an environment where you can continuously test and integrate is absolutely required as an industry. And there are certain initiatives that we have been part of that have done very well. We also took that opportunity to use the same environment to train a whole new set of folks. So we created a program called Renaissance, where we said we are going to take a lot of our talent pool that exists in the company. We are going to have them go through that lab environment as an hands-on experiences, not a paper exercise, but an hands-on experiences, where if they are developers, they can actually start to learn how to provision a cloud instance, how to put a VNF on top of it, how do you onboard it, how do you test it. So we started to go through that, and we created a more than 500 to 700 people that actually got trained through the process and got the best of the both worlds. I think that's the way we are thinking the industry will evolve. We are at that cusp right now where we have tested how it to be done. We kind of understand the value of it. I think the first couple of years were about, is this virtualization real? Is it really going to give the benefits? Is it worth taking all that pains? Now I think we have taken the pains. We understood that this is the only way out, like Nilay said. And hence, I'm seeing a serious acceleration in the skill set that will get developed. The shortage is now. 2 years from now, I think we'll have plenty of folks who will be able to take on these challenges and really bring that development mindset into the telco industry, which will drive that incubation to consumption time to be much shorter, because they'll actually get it done much faster.
Thank you, Manish. Nilay, you talked about some use cases, and I think that it's useful for us to, as industry, to think about what's your priority. If you'd say, as you talk to the Asia Pacific, where this webinar is going to be broadcast, the kind of use cases that are driving that demand for new skills, new combination of skills, new ways of working. You touched on a couple, but do you mind just taking us through maybe the top one or two, really challenging use cases which show a really compounding of different skills and ability that we should, pay more attention to?
Absolutely, and again, I'm going to echo on what Thomas and Manish has said, but I'll probably provide you an example of it, how it's working out at Spark. So we are in process of building our own access or IP and MPLS network at the moment, and we decided that we're gonna basically automate this network to begin with when we're building it instead of doing it later, because doing it later has proven to be very difficult, because you have to have inventory, you have to have automation, you have to have orchestration on the top of it, right? So we're building the team for this particular squad that's gonna automate the IP MPLS network. And the situation was exactly the same, right? You need people that understands network, you need software developers that gonna program on top of it, and you essentially need someone who understands all of it, right? So instead of finding someone or a team of people who knows all of it, we basically decided we're gonna create a squad that has got people with networks understanding or understanding of IP and MPLS network, and there's software developers working together to build this network, So we pulled together a squad that has a mixture of these people, provided them the framework that they're going to use or architecture they're going to use to implement this, and we are in a couple of fixed timeline. We're going to go live with our first use case, which is going to be mobile backhaul, and that's going to bring us. That brings us back to the conversation about use cases, right? We saw that we have to expand our coverage on the 5G RAN network, and we thought that if we automate the cell site router rollout, and if we automate the access network, then it's going to provide us huge value, because that's a process we have to repeat a number of times, or probably 450 times, right? In New Zealand. So that's what we looked at from access network perspective. From core network perspective, it's been interesting, while we want to invest in the strategic technology, which is 4G at the moment, we are conscious that the investment we want to make, because we know that the next technology is going to be 5G, right? So we're trying to balance it. What we're doing though is every time there's a life cycle of upgrading a VNF function and core network, we try and do it with automation instead of doing it manually. So if you've got X number of data center, if we automate it once, and we can replicate the same procedure or automation across all data centers. So those has been our focus so far, and we've seen that the framework that we're working on has been useful, has been successful, and some of the trials that we've done. So we essentially gonna amplify our efforts or investment into that and make it bigger next year.
Fantastic. Thomas, when I think about some of those specific developments that have really helped us accelerate, because we're talking about accelerating Telco Cloud deployments, can you just touch on a couple of initiatives that you've seen where you say, man, this is really helping us move forward quickly, whether it be cutting our ties to legacy or whether it be leaning into new technology? What kind of things float to the top of your mind when we think about those things that are really helping us accelerate?
Yeah, again, I think one thing which definitely helped is, the separation, this NFVI story, which I think did help, to accelerate the story a little bit. The ORAN, I think, again, is early, but also, now there are production out in the field. So all this is helping, to accelerate the part. Then I see a lot of stuff happening, with software in general, with, the hyperscaler coming into the game, the VMware, the Red Hat of the world, which have a hypervisor on it. I think that helps, to develop software faster and easier. And I think the other things what we see is, and that's maybe not direct with the industry itself, but in general, developing is getting easier for everybody, meaning you don't need to have a heavy investment to start with something. If you have a good idea, you can develop something these days very, very easy. And again, with the with the network open up edge story, which is, you can run services from the data center to the edge, to the far edge, to your customer promise even. I think that's definitely something which makes stuff faster and accelerate the things. So that's a little bit what I see. And again, the other part is this openness, this open standards, which also helps us, because that drives, end of the day, an ecosystem and multiple partner to do that. And then the open source, as we saw in the Nilay on the what they're doing with leverage some of this open source program, really adopt it and drive it.
You mentioned hyperscalers, and there's no question, Thomas, that they're like a mega trend that's impacting just the whole technology world, really. Where do you see, is there any difference between, say, classic enterprise versus the operators in the way that they look at hyperscalers? Is it just kind of compute and storage networking, and they just kind of weigh it up in the same way? Or do you see any big differences from the telecoms companies like Spark and others as they consider the impact of hyperscalers on their business?
Again, I think the hyperscaler is definitely, as you said, a mega trend in it. I think we need to be also a little bit realistic. I mean, network is, needs certain regulator things in it which you need to do, because otherwise you lose your license. So I think I think that there's a few things, but definitely the hyperscaler will change also the telco environment a little bit, and especially when it comes to the OSS BSS side, which quite easy to adopt. Then I think there is from my point, a collaboration between the hyperscaler and the telco operator when it comes to the edge, because there is together I think they can bring a lot of value to the end customer, to the enterprise space. On the RAN side, private networking, I think that's a little bit maybe ahead of the curve. And again, I think I don't see that there's really a lot of there is a little bit partnering, sometimes a little bit of competition, but definitely it will influence that. And the other part I think is where telco operators maybe sometimes have is the time to bring up a platform took a lot of time, and that was reason behind historical. I think that's also something where the telco operator can leverage the hyperscalers, because when they have, let's say, test phases, they can use that spin up fast labs and leverage that. So again, I think there is a lot in common. I think they will influence the industry, and I see could be a good collaboration between also learning from each other. And the other part is again is the collaboration. I don't see it like the over the top player we saw maybe in a few years ago, which was a completely competition. I see it more on the collaboration side, but again, you will see different trends depending on the region and also on the country and on the regulator side we see.
Manish, you have the burden of being a global head of network services, so you get to see everything unfolding in the world. As you see innovations, which again that you might have come across the Americas, across Europe or Asia, are there any that really float to your mind that you've seen, man, this is really a great indication that we're starting to accelerate and move forward even faster? What are some things that pop up for you?
Yeah, so I think maybe I just add on the commentary that Thomas was speaking about from a hyperscaler perspective and what it takes. I think the infrastructure as a whole, I kind of look at it as 3 layers. There is an infrastructure part of it, which is where compute, storage, bearer plane, and moving the packet faster, that world resides. And there is a network functions that sits on top of it, which was radio functions, the core functions. As Nilay was talking about, the cell site routers that could also be disaggregated, and all the routing plane exists in that plane as a function, and all other network things that are required for a network domain knowledge. And then there is a management of that network as a new age OSS, which is really automation and orchestration driven, right? If you divide the world into those three planes, the wonderful part of that world is that it allows the innovation to exist in each one of those individual planes in a own fashion, right? The hyperscalers coming in, and one thing that we have to give it that, they have mastered the art of automation, right? And they started that journey much before the telco industry did. And by now they have scaled to the point where automation is their DNA. And I think we are getting there as well, where automation is becoming our DNA, not as an afterthought. So allowing the infrastructure plane to exist, which could be a public-private combination, it could be, and that world basically of infrastructure is what we call as a D2D, it's a device to data center. Right? Everything between those two is really an infrastructure play that can be super automated and super created. So that's one world where a lot of innovation is happening. Then the network functions is where our industry has thrived on. Right, over the years, we have really done a fantastic job in investing in R&Ds, creating 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and I'm sure 6G, and things will keep going on, where we make the use of the spectrum much better. We make the efficiency of managing all the packet flows much better. All the things that we have done there, I think we'll see continuous innovation in that area, right? But I see a largest amount of disruption and opportunity coming into the management plane. And that's where the orchestration comes into the picture. That's where, simplification of the OSS tools. And that's also an area where, to Thomas's earlier point, is the least standardized area, right? OSS has been traditionally driven as a custom platforms. I still have, a lot of the OSS platforms in the industry that are still driven as an Excel worksheets, right? The workflows are done through Excels, right? And it just, the nature of it, because it's been built over such a long period of time, it's not easy to change that. And when it was done, it was state of the art, but it just that didn't move fast enough, right? So we are seeing a complete world in the OSS where it's a transformation about all those platforms to simplify them, end up consolidating into fewer platforms which are highly automated and driven by new age orchestration. And they actually inherently take advantage of the automation that is built into the infrastructure itself, right? So if your infrastructure is so automated that it can provision itself, it can self-configure, it can actually fall back as well. If one of the virtual machines goes down, all the workloads get moved to the next virtual machine and everything works great. You really don't need an OSS at that point of time to try to have to manage that as a operations at that point of time, right? So those practices, as they become real, everything that you're talking about from an acceleration perspective, that will become real. And that's where, a entire movement. And I'll just say, Jeremy, one thing is that I wish I was 25 years old today, because the kind of journey that we are seeing for the next 15, 20 years in our industry, I just can't imagine how exciting that's going to be. And we are just at the start of something that 10 years from now we'll say, well, how else would you do the world? How else would you design the network? And that's precisely to your question, acceleration will become so natural of getting the services out and deployment that we just don't have to think about it, making it happen. It will just be it.
Luckily, we have Nilay to lower the average age of this discussion group. So I really appreciate you bringing that, as well as all of your insights, Nilay. Is it that easy? Look, it's, I think I totally agree with everything Manish is saying. And as you look at that infra, the NFVI layer, the OSS orchestration, what can you, where do you see the innovation? Super interesting when you talk about how complicated this OSS environment has been, up until to date. How do you tackle it? How do you approach that, Nilay, from your perspective? Because you're going to be, owning to deliver this. You've got to drive innovation, which is risky, but you've got to contain risk because you're delivering, all these services to people who rely on you. How do you approach that?
I guess going back to the hyperscaler conversation, the whole concept of hyperscaler from technology perspective is amazing, right? I've got 5 people that looks after an FEI stack. They've got 50,000 people looking after the same, right? So there's no competition, and they've got DNA of automation, like Thomas mentioned, right? So, but on the flip side, if I look at some of the on-prem technologies that are evolving, like Kubernetes, right? There's a lot of focus on open standard, making it easier to install on bare metal, for example, right? So I think that space is evolving equally faster. So if I was to look at on-prem versus hyperscaler, I think the future, or the near future, is probably going to be a mix of both, right? Where you think about some of the edge devices, right? You really can't afford to rack and stack and install the platform as quickly as what hyperscalers are offering for edge devices, right? So it makes more sense where you have to have 500 locations with edge devices. And the management function is easier to use. Like Manish mentioned, the APIs are standardized. I don't need to worry about managing an element manager. Was gonna need to be upgraded every time I upgrade platform as well. So the whole integration or orchestration automation on top of it is very easy, from maintenance perspective. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for operators. We can already see that there's a lot of operators partnering with hyperscaler providers. I see that there's going to be massive pressures on the other operators to do either same or adopt a different approach towards the same architecture, right? The only thing I wish or I hoped would have helped was if there was more diversity, right, in this space. At the moment, there's 3 hyperscaler providers, and we all try and partner with one of them, which has been working well, but more diversity will definitely help in that space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch gears and head in another direction. Let's talk about legacy, Nilay. And I just want to ask you a quick fire question, then I'm going to go to Thomas and then Manish. Is there any legacy items we should just leave alone, just leave it as it is, don't change anything? Is there anything in your mind that's legacy? And I'll let Thomas and Manish think about that while you answer, and then we'll go to those guys. What do you reckon?
That's actually most difficult part of automation, to deal with legacy. If I was only focusing on automating 5G, I think that would be easy because those are standardized. There's more focus on standardizing those stuff with 5G and cloud native network components, right? So in my opinion, I think we need to assess the use case. We've done some trials with 3G for automation, and there was value for us because we wanted to trial automation with a lower risk component, and we thought that we could use it as a guinea pig for that, right? But we don't have to. Make sure that we have to have a plan for this legacy component. If you don't automate, doesn't mean that you're gonna leave it like that for next couple of decades, right? So I think it depends on the use cases and what makes for more what is more valuable for operator, essentially.
Sure. How about you, Thomas? Any legacy technology or legacy principles that, from your perspective, you think, man, we should just leave it alone, or is everything on the table to change?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit hard to say, to be frank. As I said before, I think it's a little bit use case specific, and it's also maybe a little bit, what is your life cycle management working on it. I think in general, I see the technology is really evolving very, very fast, and I think the life cycle management is getting really important, because traditionally, and again, I'm making it a bit black and white now, but traditional telcos are not good in switch off services or switch off systems. There's still systems running around where I did right, which is more than 25 years ago, which still running somehow around, because there is a service and maybe there are 5 customers, and we are not used in the telco industry like in the software industry, where you come and say, hey, after 2 years software is end of life, either you migrate to the next level. So I think that's also something I think we can learn, and we can also learn it from the hyperscaler. I think they do a great job on that. Sometimes it's hard for us as a consumer, but in general, I think that helps. And then the other part is really get rid of some of the legacy if you can, and also if there is no business case or it doesn't make sense to do a lot of investment, just keep it running. I don't think we need to touch and everything needs to be cloudified and everything needs to be on the newest technology. if there is an application, a service which runs and it works, let's do it. I don't think we need to to touch everything all the time, because every time we touch something, we have a risk of there's a risk of outages. There is a risk of things which could happen in the background. So I think we need to really look at individual on it. But again, if there is stuff, let it be. I mean, don't. And as I said before, you don't have to automate everything to that end of the day. But again, it really depends a little bit on the, what are the phases and where are you in the life cycle.
Manish, legacy. What are your reflections? Anything which you just don't touch, just leave that alone? It's a really interesting point Thomas makes, that we love our consumers, we love delivering to them, and also we have certain obligations. That we still have old services. So maybe there's a role for government to also play to enable us to kind of progress forward. But what's your reflections?
I completely agree with what Thomas and Nilay said. The only thing that I was reflecting on, actually, as you asked the question, is that what's the definition of legacy? Do you say 2G is legacy, or do you say 4G is legacy if you have deployed 5G, right? I kind of look at it more from an investment point of view, right? Every platform that we deploy, typically from a CFO's point of view, it comes a question of, is this an investment grade platform where I want to change, evolve, because there is more that I want to get out of it, there is more services I want to build on top of it, or I want to do something more with it? And if that's the case, then the automatic question becomes, is that any new dollar that goes into maintenance or upgrade of that platform, can it be shifted to the newer architecture so that it has a longer life cycle, right? And at that point of time, if the business case justifies it to say that, yes, we should do that and the pain is worth taking it, then it makes sense to do it. Otherwise, you leave it alone. But I think this is one of the reasons why the new architectures are shaping up the way it is shaping up, because in earlier definitions, a 2G, for an example, if you wanted to change 2G, you couldn't change the component of 2G. You had to change everything associated with 2G. You had to change the radios. You had to change the BBUs. You have to change the circuit switch what was that, class 5 switches, right? You have to really change so much more to be able to change that architecture, which really was a huge hurdle to change over, and hence we always tend to left it alone. But when you go into the new world where you have disaggregated the ecosystem, and you can start to look at it and say that, look, part of my component's life cycle has now really changed, and I can just focus on that one and change it, and I don't have to fundamentally change everything else. The ability to get away from the legacy and move into the newer technologies gets much easier, much faster, right? So I think we are still not at the tipping point where legacy components can be singled out and moved and transformed and evolved. It still requires a lot more to it, but I think we are getting there. Once we get to this cloud native microservices based architecture, which is these 3 planes that I was talking about, you could easily say that if somebody's platform has become legacy on a radio function, you can take it out and replace with the RIC controller, and that allows you an open RAN architecture now, and suddenly you have a new architecture, but you haven't changed everything else around it. That's how I look at the world of the legacy. But if you look at it from a history point of view, you're absolutely right. It's a saying that goes, right? Don't fix it if it ain't broken. So if it's working, just to Thomas's point, there is customers on it that are using it. There is no need for transforming it. Leave it alone, let it live its own life. And once it becomes too difficult, too costly to maintain and manage, it will automatically find its way out of the network.
Automatically find its way out of the network. It's, you just got me thinking that change is a necessity for success, but success is the enemy of change. And, I think that's the innovator's dilemma that we all face. Manish brought up an important point, Nilay, which I'd just like to orientate back in your direction. He talked about investment. And as we look at automation and you think about, doing things differently in the business, I can imagine that if you create an automation framework to do some new job, you actually take longer to do that job than if you just did the job. But then the next job, you just pull a switch and it's much, much faster. So how do you approach the investment profile when you're arm wrestling with the CFO and, scarce people? I mean, it's not just money, it's people and, priorities and so on. How do you address that conversation so that you can make progress?
I guess it depends on the use case. You can't really battle a conversation about automating 3G or 2G component, and I don't think it's going to be an easy conversation with CFO. Justify for funding, right? Unless you've got huge number of data centers in the country, you want to replicate the workload a number of times, But if you think about the future, like 5G technologies, it's not only replication, or it's not only automating for deploying X number of times. I think the idea is to build a zero-touch automation architecture. So once you have automation pieces ready, you can tie it up to a policy framework, an assurance framework, and build that closed-loop automation framework for future, right? And that's basically going to provide huge benefits for customer. So I think we need to flip the conversation from automation to customer perspective and put the story that this framework is going to provide scalable and resilient architecture instead of just making it an automation conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I'm glad that you bring the customer perspective back in this, because they need to see value in order to continue to fund our entire industry. Otherwise, we're going to end up needing to find new ways to add value to them.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, suddenly you blink and 45 minutes has gone by, according to my watch, and I just wonder if we wouldn't think about wrapping this up with a few closing comments. Again, I'd like to start off with you, Nilay, and then we're going to end up with Thomas back at the 60,000 foot view. But if you wouldn't mind helping me, what's the most important thing we need to focus on? If you'd give advice to the industry around Telco Cloud, accelerating 5G, how all these technologies come together, automation, use cases, what's the most important thing we need to focus on so that we can really drive value?
I think 5G brings huge benefits for enterprise and customers, right, in terms of end users. So, but it also is built on open standard and cloud native architecture. So there is a huge opportunities for operators to optimize their networks from technology perspective right now. So I think when you build 5G architecture, automation architecture, think about end-to-end use cases that's going to provide value to the customer. It's not only providing faster data or low latency services to customer. There's huge benefits in terms of designing it to automate from the beginning, right? So that would be my key message to the people or operators that think about those end-to-end use cases from the beginning and start the journey of automation with 5G.
Great, fantastic. Manish, if you would give advice to all of our SI community and now the continuous integrator community around the most important thing we should focus on, what closing comments would you offer us, please?
Absolutely. I think the first point that I will assert is that we need to look at network not as a connectivity or as a platform, but as an experience platform. We are really enabling a whole new set of experiences once the network becomes a cloud-native microservices-based architecture that Nilay was talking about. And that can be done only when you have an automation as the front and center of it, and you have a variety of different ecosystem players coming together, innovating it. Hence, I think from a continuous integration point of view, a established framework that allows this to exist is very important. And probably this is where Jeremy, I would say that we did an investment in that space, created what we call as a NetOps.ai as a platform that allows that integration to happen for an end-to-end lifecycle management. I think a platform-based approach that integrates all the different ecosystems together to realize the vision of what Nilay was talking about as an open platform and enable all sorts of new industries to coexist and innovate. That's where I would suggest is that we as an industry should focus on. And if together we didn't enable it, 5G will become just another high-speed network that will be great for some smartphone users to get AR, VR goggles and use it, but it will not unlock the full potential of the 5G, which is where we are driven to enable.
Full potential. I think that's a really great lead-in back to you, Thomas. In order that we unleash the full potential of 5G and accelerate our cloud deployments, what are your closing comments? We must make sure that we What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, Manish said it very, very well. I think, on top of that, I would really say, collaboration. Collaboration is super critical, because I think that's the only way how we get the things really, to the next level. And collaboration, again, comes then with, open standards, driving that on that. But I think it's really the collaboration aspects, working closer in the industry together, sharing knowledge we have, share that with others, making sure the others are not making the same, learning curve or mistakes. I think definitely something, and again, have things open. That's that's critical, and using standard is the other part, because as soon as we move away from that, we're ending up to building boxes or components or whatever it is, which gives then a lock-in, and that's what we don't want to do. And the other part is really watch out for software, because I think software is the next big thing. When all the infrastructure stuff is working, then we need to have services, and that's driven, as I said, as a kind of a experience platform, maybe is a better word than a platform, which is really enabled services, and learn to do the software approach in the telco industry. Bring up a service. Hey, if it's not it's not the killer application, that's okay. You can also switch that off after a few months. But having more that entrepreneur trying things out, start, do something fast, fail, but then do the next one. I think that's something also which is important.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being so gracious with your comments, and taking us right across the whole gamut of from people to new ways of thinking, new skills, automation, focusing on the use cases, what's most important. We've covered investments. We've also taken this umbrella perspective. I'd also like to just acknowledge again and thank Intel for sponsoring this webinar. It's been great working with you and the Red Baron team, who's also been working in the background. So thank you so much for joining this discussion, gentlemen, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. And ladies and gentlemen, for joining our discussion. We hope you got a lot out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.